Welcome to Keith's Friday Night Reads for this first episode. Book I just finished, and I'm recording this on Tuesday, September 24th. And that is Rita, Hayworth, and the Shawshank Redemption, a novella by Stephen King, part of his Different Seasons collection. I read that novella separate because of how much I adored the movie starring Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman, and had a chance to get it separately and read it separately, so I did. Just finished it at my desk, and I immediately 5 stars. All the beautiful language that is in the movie is there in that book. It's King's own language, even though Frank Darabont directed and adapted the script from King's novella. The true spirit of the story is there in the book, so absolutely a 5-star read. Absolutely adored it, and love the book, and I love the movie, and the movie improves on the book. So I actually saw YouTube videos recently of rating movies that were better than books, and it discusses Shawshank Redemption. The book is excellent, and the movie is excellent, so it kind of goes that way. So how this is going to work is when I read books throughout the week, I'll stop and give a quick review, and then they'll get shown on Friday night. So this is a book I just finished, and one that is now near and dear to my heart. I'll definitely say it is my favorite Stephen King book, and I've read a few. I've read the whole Dark Tower series. I've read The Stand, and mainly because it hit all the same beats as the movie. So, and of course it rings a bit truer than the movie when you think of the fact that in the movie they only have the one warden the entire time and the one head guard the entire time. That in the book, that's not true, and you wouldn't expect that over a 25-year period. So in some ways the book is better, in some ways the movie is better, but still highly recommended read. 5 stars. Love it. Hello again for episode of Keith's Friday Night Reads. Now, this book I finished also on Tuesday, September 24th, and that's Traffic, the Genius, Rivalry, and Delusion, and the $1 billion search for the $1 billion race to go viral by Ben Smith, who previously worked at Gawker and BuzzFeed. I've been recommended this book by one of the other nonfiction books I read recently, and saw that was available, decided to check it out, and it was a good read. Pretty good deep dive into the background of Gawker and everything, and I had to laugh because at one point, in one chapter, Ben writes about Benny Johnson, who wrote for BuzzFeed for a few years before going on into the right-wing blogosphere. And he mentions that he wrote a article about a Dunkin' Donuts in a grim Capitol Hill basement. And not only do I remember that article, I'm in that article. I mean, it was just a series of photos about the Dunkin' Donuts that opened here at the Library of Congress. And it came out about a couple weeks after the Dunkin' Donuts opened. And I looked at it, and there's a picture of me walking down the hallway with a donut in a bag walking away. So it was funny. I had recently read Sarah McBride's book, The State Senator from Delaware, who's now, as of recording this, just won the nomination to be the Democratic candidate for Congress in Delaware. And she went to American University, as I did, and mentioned early in the book, talking with Zach Cohen, editor of The Eagle, who was a friend of mine, and I know from having worked at The Eagle and connecting later on in reunions. So with that, it's a little bit of connection to places I know, but for Traffic, having it mention an article that I know very well, and actually has a picture of me in it, even though it is my backside, for how unflattering that may be. I suppose I gave that a star just because it referenced that article, but I gave this book 4 stars. It was an interesting read, but I definitely had a feeling like Ben Smith was... I expect that he told a true story, but I'm not certain that he's an honest narrator. So, and just the way worked out. I mean, the way the story beats it and everything of telling this nonfiction tale. It just didn't really reach me like a lot of the good histories that I've read. I mean, I wouldn't expect him to be Eric Larson or Simon Winchester, or David McCullough, but it was still, I just, if something a bit more would grab me about it, I probably would have given it 5 stars. But now I'll give it 4. Recommended read. Check it out if you want to know more about how the current internet media landscape came to be. So, check it out. Hey, this is Keith's Friday Night Reads. I'm your host, Keith F. Shelton, bringing you reviews of my reading for this week, recommending books. I just finished today. This is Friday, September 27th. Stony, the Road, Reconstruction, White Supremacy, and the Rise of Jim Crow by Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. So this is, I try to go back and forth between fiction and nonfiction. This wins being a nonfiction study of the African American experience, specifically from the time point between the end of the Civil War and basically around World War I. So we can kind of hyper-focus on that 50-year period. I've read a lot of African American histories. I've read the 1619 Project, books by Ta-Nehisi Coates, by Ibram X. Kendi, by various other authors, different histories, different backgrounds. And I've read The Spirit of Black Folk by W.B. Du Bois. I've read books by Frederick Douglass, all just growing my own understanding of the African American experience. And this one, I'm going to give it 4 stars because it is well researched and it's well argued, and there are a couple points in the book that made me think differently, but it could have been, I feel like it could have been just a little bit more. And not that, he had an idea, Dr. Gates had an idea of how far he wanted to go, and he meant to that, but I'm just thinking you go just a little bit farther and you get into like the Tulsa race riots and certain other things that happened as you get into the 1920s. But no, he stopped with World War I. So I mean, it's understandable, and he had his goal. He didn't have the story he was trying to tell. And it was a fine read. He's been a very active person. I mean, what's sad is the first I ever heard of Professor Gates was when he had an incident at his home with a local police officer back during the Obama administration. And I know President Obama had made a comment not knowing the full story, and so it became a thing. Gates was trying to get into his home. He got locked out, and the police arrested him for appearing to be breaking and entering in his own home. At least that's the story as far as I remember it. But which has nothing to do here nor there with the book itself. But it was a good read. I recommend it, especially if you're doing a deep dive into African American history. I do recommend that if you're going to do that deep dive, this is not the place to start. This is part of the reading. I mean, definitely Ta-Nehisi Coates. It's excellent work out there. Yes, I mean, he had the interesting back and forth on the rise of the new Negro and the new Negro Renaissance, which eventually became the Harlem Renaissance. There was one quote in it that got me thinking about something, and then I got just completely lost it now. But it is interesting to note that between 1910 and 1930, when you have the Great Migration, this is something I studied a bit when I worked at the Phillips Collection Art Museum, and we had some of the paintings from that, from the Great Migration painting series, Jacob Lawrence, that you had like between 1910 and 1930, you had like a 600 to 800% increase in African Americans in certain northeastern cities like Detroit, Philadelphia, Chicago, New York City. Just huge growing masses because of the African Americans fleeing the South, because the period of, and I'd always heard of Reconstruction, but I never really heard of the period of Redemption, which is how they called it, the period after Reconstruction, at least how the people in the South called it. And then, of course, but that's the rise of Jim Crow. That's the time when the lost cause myth starts to take its place. It's all interesting history. It's all part of American history, and I always like to have as full of a story of all of American history. I mean, I read the Native American history a few weeks ago with Black Hawk History of America. That's probably not the title. I'm blanking on what the actual title is. But this is obviously, like I said, it's not the first African American history I've read. It's not going to be the last. It was interesting, and if you're interested in, there's definitely a lot more to know about Reconstruction than a lot of the stuff we're taught in schools, a lot of stuff that's out there. So it's definitely be an interesting thing. I recommend that people check out what they attempted to do, and then how it all just fell apart and failed horribly. And a lot of the problems we have today have come out of the failure of Reconstruction. But then, of course, some of those same problems because slavery existed in the first place, and the different things that were done before the Civil War to try to satiate the slavers, and to the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the Compromise of 1850, just all the attempts to expand slavery and everything. We've had a lot of problems that go back to our nation's founding, and you always want to try to find something recent to influence it, but no, a lot of it just goes all the way back. And this book just helps to typify that with going into some of them. And I had read a book recently that did a more deep dive on the election of 1876, which led to the end of Reconstruction. So it was interesting reading a book about Reconstruction that didn't touch on the election at all, even though it was the deal that gave the election to Republican candidate Rutherford B. Hayes was the agreement that they would end Reconstruction and pull the troops out of the South. So Gates didn't really touch on that part, which is fine because that's covered in so many other history books. But 4 out of 5 recommend. Once again, it's Stony the Road, Reconstruction, White Supremacy, and the Rise of Jim Crow by Henry Louis Gates Jr. All right, have a good week.